The morning of church Sunday always began the same way in our house. Before the sun had fully cleared the tree line, before the children were dressed, before the horses were hitched to the buggy, my husband would find me in the kitchen or the bedroom or wherever I happened to be standing, and he would say something. Not loudly, never loudly. Jonas was not a loud man. He would say it quietly, the way you say something you have practiced so many times it no longer sounds like a practice. And whatever he said, I would carry it with me for the entire service, through the 3 hours of hymns and preaching and silence, like a stone placed carefully in the pocket of my good dress that I was not allowed to put down. I have been thinking about those words for years now. I have been thinking about what they were really saying underneath what they appeared to be saying. And I have been thinking about the morning I finally understood that what my husband said to me before church was not a comment or a reminder or even a criticism. It was a system. Old and invisible and so thoroughly woven into the fabric of who I was supposed to be that I had spent 7 years mistaking it for love. Before I tell you what he said, and before I tell you what it took me to finally hear it, my name is Clara, and this is Clara the Amish Girl, the channel where the stories that were never supposed to leave the farmhouse finally get spoken out loud. I grew up Old Order Amish in a tight district in eastern Ohio. I married at 19. I left at 26 with 3 children and a silence so heavy I am still, on some mornings, learning how to set it down. If you want to keep hearing the truth from behind the prayer cap, please subscribe and tap the bell. It is free and it keeps these stories alive for the next woman who needs them. And right now in the comments, tell me this. Has anyone ever said something to you so quietly that it took you years to understand how loud it actually was? Because that is exactly where we are going today. The first thing Jonas ever said to me before church, the very first Sunday after we were married, was this. He looked at me while I was pinning my cap and he said, "You look tired." That was it. 4 words. You look tired. I remember smiling at him and saying something about the baby keeping me up, and he nodded and we left, and that was that. I thought nothing of it. I thought it was concern. I thought it was a husband noticing his wife the way a good husband is supposed to notice. It was only years later, after I had heard those 4 words or some quiet cousin of them every single Sunday morning of our marriage, that I began to understand they were never about how I looked. They were about how I was supposed to feel about how I looked. They were a mirror held up at exactly the wrong angle, angled so that what I saw in it was never quite enough. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, because the beginning is where the pattern lives, and you cannot understand a pattern unless you watch it start. We married in the spring, 300 people in my father's barn, roast chicken and cream celery and 7 kinds of pie, and a feeling underneath all of it. Underneath the singing and the good wishes and the long table of food, of a door closing very softly behind me. Not slamming, not locking, just closing, the way doors close in old houses, slowly and with weight, so that by the time you notice it is shut, you are already on the other side. The first year was what I now understand to have been the calibration year. Jonas was not unkind in that year. He was careful. He watched. He learned the shape of me, what I needed, what I feared, what I hoped for. And he filed all of it away with the same quiet efficiency he used to run his dairy operation. He was a man who believed in understanding a system before he managed it. And I was, in the language of our community, his helpmeet, which is a word that sounds like partnership and functions like something else entirely. The Sunday morning comments began small. So small, I would feel foolish now trying to explain how much they mattered if I had not lived inside them. It was never anything you could point to and say, there, that is the thing, that is the harm. It was always something that sounded, on the surface, like the words a husband says to a wife because he is paying attention. You look tired. Did you sleep? That cap is sitting a little crooked. You seem quiet today. Are you feeling all right? The children were up late, I noticed. I hope you are not coming down with something. Every Sunday. Every single Sunday for 7 years. And here is the thing about words that are said the same way, at the same time, in the same context, week after week. They stop sounding like comments. They start sounding like truth. They start to feel like the most honest reflection of you that exists. Because the man saying them is your husband. And your husband in an Amish marriage is not simply a person you chose. He is the spiritual head of your household. He is the one who stands between you and God in the architecture of your faith. When he says you look tired, he is not just describing your face. He is describing your adequacy. And when he says it every Sunday, you begin to carry a particular question into every service. The question is not, am I tired? The question is, am I enough? I want to tell you about a specific Sunday, because specific Sundays are where the truth lives. This was 3 years into our marriage. I had 2 children by then, both under 3. I had been up twice in the night with the younger one and once with the older, who had a bad dream. And I had risen at 4 in the morning to get the bread started, and at 5 to begin breakfast, and at 6 to dress the children, and at 6:30 to dress myself, which took longer than it should have because my fingers were so tired they kept fumbling with the pins on my dress. When I finally came downstairs, Jonas was at the table with his coffee. He looked up at me. He looked at me for a long moment, the way a man looks when he is deciding what he sees. And he said, "That dress is not sitting right on you. We should have it let out before next month." I stood at the bottom of my own stairs in my own house, and I felt myself go small. Not because of the dress, because of the way he said it, because of what was underneath the saying of it, the implication that I had changed in a way that needed managing, that my body, after 2 children and almost no sleep, was something that required correction. And because it was Sunday morning, and because there were 300 people in the district who would see me that day, and because Jonas had now put in my head, as he always put something in my head on Sunday mornings, a thing I would carry through the whole service without being able to put it down. I said, "All right, I will see to it." And we went to church. I sat through 3 hours of service with my hands folded in my lap and my eyes forward, and my mind turning that sentence over and over like a stone in a tumbler. That dress is not sitting right. That dress is not sitting right. By the time the last hymn ended, I had convinced myself that everyone in the room had noticed what Jonas noticed, and that what they were all thinking about was the dress that was not sitting right on Clara, who had let herself go since the second baby. None of that was true. No one was thinking about my dress. But that is what the words did. That is what they were built to do, and I did not know that yet. I would not know it for 4 more years. I would not know it until I was sitting in a small office in Columbus, across from a woman with a ficus plant in the corner, who listened to me describe my Sunday mornings for about 20 minutes and then said, very quietly, "Do you understand that what you are describing is a pattern of control?" I did not understand it then. Let me tell you what I did understand, and when. There was a woman in our district named Ruth. She was perhaps 15 years older than me, a grandmother already, with a husband who had died 2 winters before I arrived. And she had this quality about her that I could never quite name when I was young. a kind of stillness that was different from the stillness I knew, which was always the stillness of waiting for something. Ruth's stillness was the stillness of someone who had already arrived somewhere and had no more waiting to do. I sat beside Ruth at a quilting one afternoon when I was about 4 years into my marriage. I don't remember how we got onto the subject. I only remember that at some point I mentioned, without meaning to say as much as I said, that Sunday mornings were hard for me. I said I always seemed to feel worse about myself on Sunday mornings than on any other day of the week. And I couldn't quite figure out why, because Sunday was supposed to be the day of peace. Ruth kept her eyes on her stitching. She said, "Who do you see first on Sunday mornings before you leave the house?" And I said, "Jonas, of course." And she said, "And what does he say to you?" And I said, "Oh, different things. He notices things. He pays attention." She said, "What kind of things does he notice?" And I said, "Just things. How I look, if I seem tired, if something is not quite right." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My husband, God rest him, used to say things to me on Sunday mornings too. For 30 years he said things to me on Sunday mornings." She paused. She said, "I spent 30 years thinking he was the most observant man I had ever known." She paused again. Then she said, "It took me until after he was gone to understand that what he was observing was not me. It was the door. He was making sure the door was still there, that I still knew where it was, that I still understood what it would cost me to walk through it." I looked at her. I said, "What door?" And she looked at me with something in her eyes that I can only describe as a very old patience. And she said, "The door between being a good wife and being something less. He wanted you to spend 3 hours in that church house sitting next to the door, so that you never forgot you were standing beside it." I went home from that quilting, and I made supper, and I did not say anything to Jonas, and I did not change anything about my life. Because Ruth had given me something true, and I did not know yet what to do with true things. I only knew how to survive inside the untrue ones. But the next Sunday morning, when Jonas looked up from his coffee and said, "You seem tired, Clara. Are you all right?" I heard it differently. For the first time, I heard it as what it was. Not concern, not observation, not a husband paying careful attention to his wife. It was a calibration, a small, precise adjustment of the dial. A reminder, delivered in the gentlest possible voice, that I was always being measured, and that the measurement had consequences I would feel not from him, but from the whole community around me. From the eyes at church, from the women who sat on the other side of the room when a wife had let something slip, from the bishop's quiet conversations with the men by the fence, from the mothers and sisters-in-law who arrived at your kitchen with coffee and a kind of love that had teeth in it. After I left, my therapist gave me the words for what I have just described. She gave them to me slowly, one at a time, the way you hand something fragile to someone whose hands are still shaking. Monitoring behavior, psychological conditioning, low-grade destabilization, creating a state of chronic self-doubt as a mechanism of control. In my community, none of those words existed. We had one word for it. We called it a husband knowing his wife. I want to be careful here because I am not telling you Jonas was deliberately calculating. I am not telling you he sat in the barn at night designing a system to diminish me. I believe he did what he did the way most of us do the harmful things we do. Unconsciously, fluently, following a pattern he had been handed by his own father, who had been handed it by his father, who had learned it in a community that had refined it for generations until it ran as smooth as a good engine and left no visible marks. That is the thing about a system that has run long enough. It stops needing anyone to run it. It runs itself. Through the fathers who hand it to the sons, through the mothers who arrive at the kitchen with bread and warnings, through the bishop's wives who drink coffee and look at your floors, through the Sunday morning comments, small and patient and perfectly placed, that a wife carries into church like a stone in her pocket, week after week, year after year, until she can no longer remember a Sunday when she felt like enough before she walked through the door. I left when my youngest was 3. I will not tell that story today. But I will tell you this. The last Sunday morning I spent in that house, Jonas looked up from his coffee, and he said, "You look tired, Clara." And I looked at him for a long moment, and I thought, I know what that is now. I know exactly what that is. And I did not say it out loud because I was not ready yet to pay what saying it out loud would cost. But I held it in my chest the whole drive to church. And for the first time in 7 years, I did not feel the stone in my pocket. I felt something else, something small and sharp and entirely my own. If you were ever told that someone was paying attention to you when what they were really doing was watching the door, I see you. If you ever spent hours in a service or a meeting or a family dinner sitting next to an exit someone else had pointed out for you, I see you. If a person who was supposed to love you ever found a way to make you feel like you were always slightly failing, always slightly not enough, always one small correction away from acceptable, and if that person did it so quietly and so consistently that it started to feel like truth, I see you. You were not failing. You were being made to feel like you were failing. And there is a word for that in the outside world, even if there was no word for it in the place where you lived. Ruth died the winter before I left. I heard about it through the network of women who still spoke to me at the edges of things, in parking lots and at farm stands, in the careful, sideways way information moves when a community is watching. I could not go to her funeral. By then, I was already standing in the doorway myself, already more outside than in, and showing up would have made things harder for the women who had been kind to me. But I thought about her. I thought about the quilting and the stitching and the things she had said about the door. I thought about 30 years of Sunday mornings and a man she called observant, and the understanding that came to her only after he was gone. I thought about all the true things she had known and carried alone, and finally sat down beside me on a bench one afternoon, like a piece of heavy cloth she was finally done with. She is one of the reasons I am sitting here today. She is one of the reasons I know what I know well enough to say it out loud. Before you go, I want to say something from the heart. More than 90% of the people watching this video still haven't subscribed yet. And perhaps that wouldn't matter so much if these stories were just stories. But they are not. They are pieces of lives. Pieces of mornings and kitchens and church benches and long drives home in buggies where something was said or not said that a woman carried for years without knowing what it was. If this story reached something in you, if it named something you didn't have a word for, if it took you back to a room where someone was always quietly measuring you and calling it love, then I hope you will subscribe and stay a little longer. It is free, and it helps these stories reach the next woman who needs them. And before you leave, tell me in the comments, did someone ever say something to you so quietly and so often that it started to feel like truth? Tell me what it was. Tell me when you finally heard it for what it was. Tell me if you are still learning to unhear it. Until next time, remember this. You were never too much. You were never too little. You were always exactly enough. And any voice, however quiet, however gentle, however carefully placed on a Sunday morning before you walked out the door, that tried to make you feel otherwise, was not love. It was a hand on a door you were always free to open.